Well, welcome to this site of Masada. I'm really excited to share this experience with you. We're going to be seeing everything, exploring Masada. Masada means fortress, and it's believed that King David, before he was king, then hid out up here. He would come from En-Gedi. Herod the Great built this. It already existed, but he just massively transformed it. And so we're going to be talking about everything here. We're going to be seeing some Roman forts, Roman walls, because right here what happened is an absolutely sobering, tragic event. Up on top of Masada is where around 967 Jews took their lives instead of surrendering to the Romans. We're going to be talking all about that. So we're going to be talking about the location. We're going to be talking about some of the historical background. We'll be talking about the Bible, the things that happened here. Then we'll be ending with the faith lesson. So I think you're going to find this very, very touching. And once again, Masada is a mixture of grandeur, of greatness, but of absolute tragedy. And it's very, very sobering what took place here. And we're going to be exploring and learning all about that. So once again, I think you're going to find this very, very touching, this place. So you ready to go explore it? Okay, let's go. Now let's talk a little bit about the location of Masada. It's found at the southern end of the Dead Sea, about 40 miles or 64 kilometers southeast of Jerusalem. It's a natural flat mountain that rises up from the valley floor some 1,000 feet or 300 meters. It's like a huge column with sheer cliffs on every side that makes it virtually unreachable. Ancient Gomorrah, we believe, lies at the base of Masada, and ancient Sodom is south of Masada, about 14 miles or 23 kilometers. The base of Masada is in a desert region, about 1,000 feet or 305 meters below sea level. So this area of the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth. Absolutely amazing. Now the word Masada means fortress. That's its meaning. Now what is some of the historical background that led up to the fall of Masada? So this story of Masada is really a sobering, thought-provoking, somber story. So what are some of the events that led up to the fall of Masada? Now Masada was one of 3 fortified fortresses King Herod built for pleasure purposes and from which to protect his territories. He built Masada in about 24 BC, but we also need to understand that Masada did exist long before that. David used it, so it was a natural fortress place that was for defense purposes. Now Masada was fortified with elaborate water cisterns that were fed by diverting water from the nearby mountains. It even had swimming pools and many of the luxuries of life afforded at that time. In addition to ample water storage, Masada had 15 storehouses of food, enough for 10,000 people for 10 years. And you can see the remains of these storehouses still here today. So in 66 AD, events began to unfold in Israel that caused the Jews to rebel against Roman rule. This revolt began in Caesarea Maritime. From 66 to 70 AD, when the nation was in revolt, Jewish zealots who had fled from Jerusalem and the surrounding areas took the fortress of Masada from Roman occupation. They were national freedom fighters who opposed Roman rule, In their conquest, they gained possession of all the stored food and water at Masada. Between 66 and 70 AD as well, Rome conquered all the northern territories and cities of Israel. In 70 AD, under the command of Titus, the Romans totally destroyed Jerusalem in a bloody battle that lasted well over 4 months. Josephus, a Jewish historian, claims that 1.1 million Jews lost their lives in this battle, and another 97,000 were captured and enslaved. The temple was leveled in Jerusalem in the siege at this time as well. In 73 AD, there had amassed a total of 967 Jews, counting their families, at Masada. They were under the command of Eleazar ben Yair, a Jewish zealot freedom fighter. After conquering Jerusalem and most of Israel, the Romans headed south to conquer the southern strongholds around the Dead Sea region and Masada. Masada was the last stronghold of the Israelites that existed, and the Romans amassed their troops there in the fall of 73 AD. So this is Masada right here, and then we are down over here. We're going to take this tram up to right in here. Okay, we're going to take this tram up. We're going to be looking at the base around here of Roman forts. There was 8 Roman forts. Right here is the siege ramp that the Romans built with the help of Jewish slave labor. We're going to be seeing that. We're going to be doing part of our talk from right up here looking down at this. Okay? Then we have, right in here was Herod's storehouses. Right here he had hanging palaces. One there, and then one up at the top up there. So this was kind of fortified. And then he had another fortified palace over here in this area. Okay, now he would build it in about 24 BC. We're going to be talking a lot about the history of that when we get up on top. But anyway, the siege ramp came right up here, and then right in this area is where they drew lots to decide about killing each other, and we'll be talking about that. It's very, very sad. So anyway, this is a massive column, and once again, it's believed that King David would come up here as well, okay, because its name means fortress. All right? Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go look at a movie, okay? We'll do a movie, and then we're going to take the tram up. So let me get out in front of you.
Herod, like any other king, built his palaces to the highest standards of his day. One of them is this Western Palace. Herod's architect was probably a short guy. Here he built himself a bathhouse, and he would put his lamp here and enter his bath. What can I tell you? This king loved the good life.
Okay, do you see where we came up? Do you see where the tram came up? Just follow the line, see that? Do you see a big square right in front of where you get on the tram? Now don't drop your phones over the edge. You see that? That was a Roman fort. And then do you see a wall that ran around this? Do you see in front of this square that's to the farthest to your right? If in front of that square, coming this way a little bit, is a line. Can you see that line? That was the wall. The Romans built a wall around Masada. So we have 3 encampments. We see a wall that went all around Masada. Okay, so now also you have a good view of what's believed to be Gomorrah. Then you have, in the distance, you have the Dead Sea. Okay, and you can see now how it's divided. Okay, so now the sea, because of the water level dropping, receding year after year by about a meter a year, then we're seeing this now, the Dead Sea drying up. Our mission, we'll be seeing a lot of this as we come back, we'll see it, but our mission right now is we want to go to the siege wall, and that's where we're going to be doing part of our talk at the siege wall. We'll be doing our talk in different places. What we're going to be seeing up here ahead of us, it was part of King Herod's palace on this side. So he had palaces over there in a fortified area. Then he had another palace over here in a fortified area. So what you're looking at right here is the siege ramp that the Romans built then to get up to Masada. It was much higher in that time because erosion has dropped it considerably. So you have the siege ramp right here. Then over to your right, do you see a big large square? And then do you see another square? Okay, that's where the Romans' main camp was set up. They got here and they built their forts, and then they built a wall around Masada to encompass it, and then they engaged with the Jewish zealots up here for months, but then they decided to build the siege ramp. They brought a legion of the 10th Legion, which was around 8,000 Roman soldiers, and then they brought about, it's estimated, around 5,000 to 6,000 Jewish slave labor force as well. Okay, so what took place here is that they built this, they just brought rocks from everywhere, and they were able to get up here. And so this was a walled, it was a double-walled city up here. We'll be looking at that in a moment. And so then they got up here with the battering ram right here, and they were able to batter part of it, the Romans, and then the Jewish zealots up here gathered beams and stuff from their buildings, put another wall and filled it full of dirt to try to absorb the pounding. But then the Romans were able to get through that with their battering ram. You saw the movie about the fire and stuff that came out. And so then the Romans were able to get it to a state then wherein they were going to come up here the next morning. So they go down, they get all ready for the next morning, and they're going to come up here and they're going to engage in what they believe is going to be a bloody bloodbath. These Roman soldiers down here have been now engaged in this for months. It's hot and they're angry. And then what the Jewish zealots up here would do is they had swimming pools up here and everything. They would throw water down on them to mock them. The Romans were just angry. They were fierce as lions. So they thought they were going to come up the next day and then kill all these Jews, but what they found was that the Jews had killed themselves. So then right here is the synagogue, then where the Jewish men would meet to decide what they're going to do. Okay, and this is where Eleazar would give his passion speech then, suggesting that it would be better for us to take our own lives than to let the Romans conquer us, because they will abuse our children, they'll rape our wives, our children will become slaves. They most likely would maybe crucify us, because that's what the Romans did. That would put the fear. And once again, the Romans were extremely angry at these Jewish zealots up here. So, who are these Jewish zealots? Who are they? Well, they are people that love their country. We would call them patriots. And they saw their country falling, and as the country fell, then a lot of them would come here to Masada for protection, because the country's falling. And so these are freedom fighters, but they're also just people that are seeking protection. So roughly, then in 73 AD, when this event happens, you have roughly about 1,000 Jewish zealots, people seeking refuge up here. And so, once again, right there is where the men would gather together to decide what we're going to do. And so they would decide that it's better for us to take our own lives than to give our lives to the Romans, because the Romans were brutal. I mean, the whole crucifixion system was prophesied, but it was under the Romans. They were the ones that really developed the crucifixion. It was brutal. People would hang on the cross for days often. And so they knew that if we let the Romans come up here, they're madder than hornets. They're madder than hornets. And when the Romans conquered, especially places like this, they would then make the people pay an ugly price. You can surrender and we'll be merciful to you, but if you don't, you're going to pay. You will pay dearly. And so these Jewish zealots up here that had fled here, then they knew what would await them. The men probably would be maybe crucified, whipped, beaten. They would become slaves. And interestingly, when the 10th Legion came and they did a lot of this work, then they used the Jewish slave labor force. And so when the siege ramp was being built, as they got closer, then the Romans stood back and they made the Jews work on that. Why? Because they thought, okay, the Jews up here aren't going to be throwing rocks and shooting arrows. They won't kill their own countrymen. So they were very wise in what they did. So they came with this massive force, but they decided it would be better for us to take our lives than to give it to the Romans to be abused. Our children would be slaves, our daughters raped. I mean, they just saw the life that would await them. And they were sick and tired of slavery, if you understand. I mean, they were a free people, a glorious people. They're captured by the Syrians, captured by the Babylonians, the Greeks have them. And then they get their own autonomy under the Hasmonean period, then they lose it again under the Romans. So they want freedom. Alrighty, this end of the Masada, this northern end, was the area that Herod the Great really built up and fortified it and had it protected just for himself. In a moment we're going to go see the hanging palaces that he had. He had one palace down there. He had kind of a summer palace and kind of a winter palace. The northern palaces were used more in the hot summer because they were on the north side and shaded. But you can see out here in front of me, you can see all these storerooms. See these long rooms? Okay, so this was storehouses. Right underneath us was the bathhouse. This was King Herod's bathhouse. What we're going to do now is we're going to come on over here and we're going to go down into the place where they actually found the potsherds, and they believe it's the place where the last 10 men then met and then ended their lives. Right in here is where this area is where they found the potsherds. So we were at the synagogue, we saw that. That's where all of the men gathered together to decide what they were going to do. At that spot is where Eliezer gave this passionate speech, and I'm just going to read just a little bit of it to you. It says, "The Romans are angry after the long battle and will kill most of us by torture. Those who are not killed will be mistreated and forced to be slaves. Our women will be raped before our eyes, violated, and our children will be tortured and forced to be slaves as well." And also, it's very likely a lot of the men could have been crucified. So just a real bloody situation and a real tragic end awaited these Jewish zealots up here. So he gave this passion speech in the synagogue here, and then they had this special meeting, and he suggested that our only option was just to take our lives. So this is actually then how this process of this mass suicide takes place, and it's very sobering and very saddening, but they did have a plan, and this is what they did. So in the synagogue, the men gathered for a special meeting and drew lots, picking out 10 courageous men who knew about killing and understood how to die. So then every father went home and killed their wives and children. I just can't even imagine that. Then all the men gathered again together, and the 10 of these that were chosen that knew about killing and dying, these men in the group killed the remaining men. So all these fathers that went home, then these 10 then killed all of the fathers. So we're probably talking at least around 200 to 300 fathers. Then the last man killed the other 9, and then the last man killed himself. So on May 3rd, 74 AD, after 7 months or so of long battle weariness, the Romans entered the top of Masada and stood in awe-stricken silence as they saw what had happened. Because they were coming up here expecting to now get vengeance. And so they didn't get that. Instead, they were just in a state of shock as they saw what had taken place up here. So, I personally don't believe that it's within our right to take our own lives. Okay, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. I believe that God is the one who should take our lives. I don't endorse what they did. Now, can I understand it? Absolutely. I can understand it a little bit, but to be honest with you, going back in time and the Romans and how brutal they were, I can fully see why they did what they did. So anyway, in this particular situation then, they felt justified in taking their lives because it was for a noble reason, so to speak. And so therefore that they would not be held accountable before God. So it's hard to understand. I mean, it's just absolutely sobering what took place here. Absolutely sobering. I mean, can you imagine men going home and, saying goodbye to your wives? Can you imagine? But they lived in a different era as well. They were used to death and they were used to battling and things like that. And so they did live in a different era. And life was precious, but not like necessarily it is today to us, you know. So as you're coming up here on the left, you just have a photo of what a cross section of what it looks like, the hanging palaces. Okay, I think everyone's gathered around. So once again, Herod the Great, in about 24 BC, then he's the one who's going to take this and just take it to a totally different level. Once again, food for enough people for 10 years for 10,000 men, women and children. And so then he would have the northern part up here would be more fortified for him, all the storage and everything. Then he had another palace. Then there was many other buildings. And then later, there would be a synagogue that would be built up here and stuff like that. So when the Jewish zealots then took this over in 66 AD, okay, this is roughly 36 years after Christ's prophecy, then they would change it and they would have a synagogue, and they would take what Herod had and then they would live in the buildings and make them their homes and stuff. Let me take advantage of the shade that we have, and I just want to talk a little bit about from the Bible of what happened here and why it happened, okay? While it's extremely ugly, God had a role in all of this, not that he in any way wanted them to commit suicide, none whatsoever. Part of this fulfills prophecies, the fact that this was, once again, God's hand of judgment on the Jews for their rejection of him. Now, he disciplined them severely with the Assyrian captivity, with the Babylonian captivity, but now God is going to take it to another level in 66 to 70 AD, basically 70 AD in this time period. Why? Because they rejected the Messiah. They rejected Christ. Okay, so because of that, that was ultimate judgment, so to speak. Then they're going to go into captivity and be dispersed all over the world until 1948 when they would start coming back. So I'm just going to read to you a little bit about that. So in Luke 19:41, it says, "And when he drew near and saw the city," this is when Christ was coming down on the triumphal entry, when he came near and saw the city, this would be Jerusalem, he wept over it. He wept. He wept over the city, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace." It could have been totally different. "But now they are hidden from your eyes." Now we have the pronouncement of judgment. "For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade all around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you." Why? Because you did not know the time of your visitation. So, once again, Christ prophesied the city of Jerusalem and even Israel is going to fall. Okay? So then that's in roughly 30 AD is when Christ is going to give this prophecy. Then 40 years later, Jerusalem will fall. And I don't know if you've watched any videos or read anything about that fall. It's not found in the Bible, but you can find it in history. It is gory. They had some infighting among leaders within the city. They would burn each other's food. So the battle lasted quite a while that the Romans were around the city of Jerusalem. And so then it got so bad that they ran out of food. women would eat their own children. And to find bird dung was like having a ribeye steak. It just got so ugly. And then, of course, then the Romans did breach the walls, come in, burned the temple, leveled it to the ground, and then the city as well would be vastly destroyed. And then, of course, that was in 70 AD. Well, now there's still these pockets of rebellion around. One was here in Masada. And so what happened here in Masada then is similar. It gets really, really ugly here. What are some faith lessons that we can take away from this site? Well, while we don't endorse a suicide, taking your life, and we don't believe that they should have done that. We believe that it's God's right. He gives life, He takes life. We just surrender to Him. While we don't agree with what they did, we can certainly understand what they did, in part, because once again, in that time, they knew that the Romans were just absolutely going to just rake them over the coals. Now, while some of these Jewish zealots were followers of Christ, and many in the nation of Israel were followers of Christ, this is a big principle I think you're going to want to understand. There were many righteous in Israel, but yet the righteous always suffer at the hands of the wicked. And when you have wicked leadership, then the righteous are going to suffer under that. So it was the priesthood, those in authority, that rejected the Messiah. They are the ones who lead a nation, and they are the ones God will hold accountable because they set the tone for a nation. So when leaders in authority make decisions that affect a nation, they will be held accountable for that. And so, unfortunately, the religious leaders who rejected their Messiah, then the righteous suffered at their hands. And it will be the same for us. When our leaders, religious leaders, don't follow the Lord, then we're going to suffer as a result of that. It's just the way it is. It's just an unfortunate reality of life. And unfortunately, when nations fall, it's because of the governing leadership of that leads nations downward. We see this in the period of the judges. We see it in the period of the kings. And that's what you see. There were many righteous, but unfortunately, when you get bad leaders, then they fall. And so the nation of Israel then, right here at Masada, would be where it would be over, and the nation of Israel would now no longer rise and have any power whatsoever. So the Jews, bless their hearts, they have paid a great price for their rejection of Christ. They have paid a great price. And it's unfortunate, but when we're in Jerusalem, we'll be overlooking the Temple Mount, and where their temple once was, what is there now? Dome of the Rock. Dome of the Rock. And there are many Jews today who have returned who are secular, and they're disillusioned, and they wonder, if God loves us, why have we suffered so much? And so there's a lot of Jews who have just rejected God because they just don't understand. But once again, they paid a great price for the rejection of Christ. And that's the way it will be. And unfortunately, for those who never did come to Christ and recognize their Messiah, then Scripture says that there is no other name under heaven whereby we must be saved. Christ is the only way. This is the testimony that God has given us life, and this life is in His Son. He who has the Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, has the life. He who does not have the Lord Jesus Christ does not have life, and the wrath of God rests upon him. So unfortunately, the Jews today, that's where they're at. I purposefully don't wear any kippahs and stuff like that because I love the Jews with all my heart, but right now they're a false religion. Biblically, they are a false religion because they have zeal, like it says in Romans chapter 10 through 12. They have zeal, but not according to knowledge. They have rejected their Messiah. And what happened here and what happened through their country, is because of their rejection of their Messiah. So what a powerful lesson for us. When God speaks, he means business. God is loving, he is merciful, he is patient, but he means business, and what he does say will happen. Well, thank you, and may God richly bless you.